Hello and welcome. This is The Green Room by Deloitte, a podcast where we ask tricky questions about the world around us. I'm Ethan Worth and you're listening to episode 9 where we ask, can creativity change the world? Thank you for tuning in. It's Ethan, and today I'm stepping into George's shoes as he's on paternity leave, and I'm joined for the first time with Dara. How are you, Dara?
Very good. Very excited to be doing a first podcast with you.
Okay, so this week we're talking about all things creative, and in preparation, Dara, we did our creativity quiz, the Adobe creativity quiz.
That we did.
So what did you get? What creative type are you?
I was told that I'm a visionary.
A visionary?
Yeah, and I got this strange, weird cactus icon with 5 eyes to really emphasize all my vision, clearly. So that was quite interesting. And apparently it means I am only limited by the boundaries of my belief, which actually does ring true, and that I'm intuitive and impactful. So
excellent.
It's positive.
Sounds great.
You?
I also did it. So for listeners, there's 8 types.
Yeah.
I also got a visionary, so that must probably say something about the pod.
Yeah.
You took very positive things from it. I took some positives, mainly that I have a lot of ideas and like to talk about things, but not so good at the doing.
Oh yeah,
so
yeah, the focus.
Maybe, I guess we've got our sound technicians for that, and our guests could more of the doers, maybe. So, yeah, today we're asking, can creativity change the world? And Dara, if you'd like to introduce our guests.
Sure thing. So today in the studio we have Debapratim, also known as Debo. Debo is one of our Deloitte economists. He spends his days advising clients on economic developments in the UK and abroad. He's part of the team that leads our research into the skills of the future also. Welcome to the studio.
Thanks, Dara.
We also have Andy Sandoz. Andy is the creative officer of Deloitte Digital. He oversees Deloitte's creative agencies, including Acne and Market Gravity, and specialises in blending creativity with new technologies. Welcome to you also.
Hello.
Okay.
And I think it's time for an icebreaker question.
Favourite part. Okay, let's see what we get. I'm going to go right to the bottom of the bucket. Oh, if you were a chocolate bar, what would you be? Let's start with you, Debo.
I would go with actually a chocolate bar that I don't think a lot of our listeners have had or would know. It's a chocolate bar that was very, very popular in India where I grew up. It was called 5 Star, and it was actually a Cadbury's product. So there's a chocolate bar called Cadbury 5 Star, which is, it's not very different from a Mars bar, but it's without the nuts.
Better then,
yeah.
Improvement. Okay.
Yeah.
What about you, Andy?
Well, the person who spent a lot of years in advertising wants to say Boost, because the advertising was slightly rippled with a flat underside, which was, if you're old enough to remember the advert, was a very, it was a Vic and Bob ad. I'm just getting all my late 90s references out in one go. But it was sort of slightly rippled with a flat underside was the ad line, which, it worked very well. But my answer would actually be a Cadbury's Orange Club, because that was the chocolate biscuit of my youth in the fridge that my father always liked. And I actually have quite an emotive memory of. So.
Nice.
Wow.
So you want to bring back to those good times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ethan, what about you? Any throwback chocolate loves?
I think I'll go more down the route of what describes me best. I think maybe like a Mars, a bit soft, quite sweet. My producer's laughing at me, but a bit sickly if you have too much of it. I think that's.
No, we can never have too much of it, Ethan. Don't worry,
thanks,
it's fine.
Dara. I was
That's
fishing
fine.
for it.
Exactly, don't worry, I got there. I'm very lucky because the chocolate bar that I'm going to choose wasn't a chocolate bar until very recently. So Maltesers used to just be like the little balls, but now it is a chocolate bar. And when you bite into it, it goes pop and crackle in your head. So I feel like that represents me just kind of fizzing away in the corner, crazily.
Is that an example of creativity changing the world, do you think?
Well, it changed my world. When it came in chocolate bar format, I could just get it in my mouth all in one go, as opposed to having to get the little spheres. So it was brilliant, much more efficient consumption. Yeah.
Okay, so today we're discussing all things creative. I'm particularly interested in this topic as someone who would like to be more creative than I am. So I'm looking forward to getting some tips on how to be more creative. But I guess we should probably start with, what is creativity? What does it mean to you two? And how do we define it? And I guess also, why do we need it?
So those are about 4 questions in one, I think. We start with the hardest line. What is it?
Yeah, let's start with
What is it?
I think that's the...
It's a fascinating question, isn't it? Because it's so big. But like on a very simple, basic level, just the ability to generate something new. And I think it very quickly gets put into a box of aesthetics when you talk in a sort of commercial sense. Oh, well, that's just going to be visual or arts. And actually, it's much more about ideas and concepts, and yes, encompassing the way those concepts come to life. But it really is, for me, about ideas, big, small, whatever, really, and the ability to have and execute those ideas. So I think really it's the human ability to smash things together and come up with new ideas.
Definitely, and maybe smash them apart as well, and then put them back together differently.
Exactly.
I guess. Yeah.
I'd go with what Andy has said, but I'd have to change it a little bit in terms of, I'd say that it's certainly coming up with new ideas, but when we think about that, sometimes what we do is we just think about big ideas. So we think about things like the steam engine or electricity, and we think they are, I suppose, the sort of pinnacle of human creative genius. And I think big ideas can be slightly overrated. And in my opinion, creativity is actually coming up with small ideas that really make the most of big things. So I'll give you a small example. The birth of the American suburbs was due to the creation of the car. So the invention of the car led to the birth of suburbs, and whoever thought of that enabling them to move out of big cities must have had a great idea. And I think that's creativity at its best, even though it's probably something that the car isn't really celebrated for having created.
It's interesting. It's like the consequence of ideas.
Yeah.
Or the impact.
So those ripples out from the original idea that triggers sort of more innovation, which is quite interesting.
I would say the point of a big idea is to have lots of small ideas. They're not mutually exclusive in that way. I think a big idea is generally, it's certainly in communications form, is a platform for many other ideas that happen in a very sort of fractured marketplace where you have to tell lots of little stories. And so the big idea will hold them all together.
Yeah, I suppose it brings me back to the chicken and the egg problem, really. I mean, is it the small ideas that make the idea big in the first place?
Yeah. The point for me is that both are good.
Yeah.
There's sort of, and I kind of agree with you. I quite often think whoever thought that up, there'll be something about a switch or a plug or a little thing in the house. So someone's thought that up, or I do it with TV a lot. Like whoever wrote that line or did that thought about this, and that's just so clever. And there'll be something in the direction in a film, and I'll rewind it, and my wife is like, "What you do?" I'm constantly rewinding things on TV, and I'm like, "Look at the way that was shot, or the way that all small ideas that emotively carry the story better, but isn't the big arc of the story." So for me, they're all together.
Yeah. Also, I think sometimes very simple, small ideas can take ages to come across. And I was thinking this a couple of weeks ago. I was watching one of these old classics. I think it was Casablanca. Or, I mean, whenever you watch these old classics, there's usually a scene where somebody is carrying luggage and seeing someone off at a train station, but they didn't have wheeled luggage. And it's such a simple thing. And you'd expect people to have, put two and two together and thought, it's going to be a heavy thing, I'm going to carry this.
How long did it take for someone to stick a wheel on a bag? It took ages.
They're all gliding effortlessly with these heavy trunks. And you just think, this is so romantic, but it's so practical, actually.
Did you have to invent rollerblades first, and then you possibly had to invent, roller skates, and then you go to rollerblades? Because if you think it's a particular kind of wheel that has to work in a particular kind of way, so there's a little inventions of the wheels to get to the point where they could go on a bag.
Like iterations.
And then you're right. Why didn't that happen much sooner is very true.
Exactly. Yeah.
I like that.
It's those small ideas making the big idea of the wheelie bag, which we now all rely on so well.
But what I think is nice about this point of view is they make ideas very democratic, and it means that we as certainly humans are good at having ideas, and that's not always celebrated or even permissible in the workplace, in cultures, and the fact that we are programmed to have loads of small ideas all day long, being in a culture that will release those and make use of them and apply them, I think is is where we need to be and where all businesses need to be.
So we've touched on like different types of creativity, I guess, suburbs to wheelie suitcases. But for both of you, how do you see creativity being measured? Or are there elements of it that are just too nebulous, too out there to ever be properly measured?
I'd sort of want to look at the economist for that answer first.
Start with you
but
first,
it may,
then.
Yeah, well, as an economist, I'm obliged to say that we obviously are obsessed with measuring anything and everything, including happiness. And our preferred measure of, I suppose, creativity would be productivity, which is really a measure of how much economic value does the average individual create per hour of input. And I have to say there are lots of problems with that measure, and I suppose the community of economists are trying to grapple with it. One of the big challenges that we've faced over the last 30, 40 years is that we've had amazing change in technology, huge innovations. We've had the internet, we've had the birth of the smartphone. It's completely revolutionized the way people work. But if you look at productivity growth in the West, it's remained more or less flat. So one of the big challenges that economists have is that they've got a measure which doesn't seem to reflect the huge changes that have happened over the last decades. And there are lots of explanations for that. Some people say that productivity is mismeasured. We undermeasure in a digital age productivity growth because we don't measure the value of intangibles. So, for example, if we look at the patents that a company owns, they're not really measured as in terms of sort of measuring GDP or the output of the company. Or say, for example, if you invest in marketing to build a huge brand, say, for example, if you're Apple and you built a huge brand, all your investment into marketing will be measured as cost rather than actually measuring as investment. And that changes the measure, basically means that productivity is undermeasured as a result of that. That's one argument. There's another argument which I think perhaps is slightly controversial, which is propounded, actually has got lots of economists who talk about it, propounded by Robert Gordon, who's an economist in the US, who says that new technologies like the internet or smartphone are just not as revolutionary as old technologies like indoor heating, flushing toilets. And therefore, we're unlikely to see the kind of productivity gains that we saw with the introduction of the steam engine or with electrification that at the moment.
I would lay a third theory on there that says their impact hasn't hit yet. Because if I think fundamentally the way we use our phones is not to the full potential of that medium, for work or for anything really. We're still only working out the changes that are coming, and it seems to me that the revolution hasn't arrived. Maybe it's arrived on Twitter. Things move fast on Twitter and slow everywhere else. But you're talking about the wheels on the suitcase take years to reach. The wheels took years to. I mean, how many years did they take to reach a suitcase? And so, which would be the good name for the podcast. But that sense of mobile hasn't dramatically changed my working method yet. They're starting to, and mobility is starting to change the way I work and where I work and how I can work is now starting to change. But it's not necessarily the technology that's going to do that. It's the business cultures reacting to the technology. And so it's the influence of the idea of mobile where the big change may come. And it just feels to me that we're in the foothills of that change.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. And there's a lot of historical data that supports that case. If you look at the steam engine, really, it took about 150 years after the invention of the steam engine for it to really revolutionize the way industrial production back in the day
and probably in ways they didn't think, as you said, it was invented for one thing and its consequence was another, which is very common.
Yeah. And so I'd agree with you. Just one slight fly in the ointment there is that actually the pace of adoption, we've been explaining this by saying that actually it took a long time for the steam engine to really permeate through to different bits of the economy back then. But over the years, pace of adoption of technology has actually accelerated. And now actually technology takes it's a lot quicker to assimilate and for people to start using it to a sort of mass scale. So take, say, for example, smartphones. I mean, they're all over the world now. I mean, if you think of telephones, they took about 60, 70 years to actually reach different corners of the world in that, in terms of take-up.
What about the adoption curve in terms of actually using or having? What about comprehending? Because like making a telephone call is pretty basic, like to understand. Yes. I mean, I pick it up, I punch a number, it goes somewhere. You can work that out. It's confusing, I guess, the first time, but you can. There's a great video of a couple of 15-year-olds trying to use an old telephone, going around social media at the moment. It's very funny trying to watch because they don't know to lift it up, so they're just pressing it, and then after about 10 minutes they work out how to lift it up. But it's the point about comprehension of the technology and what it can do. I think is still, I would say, technology is fast adoption, but really hard to understand. There's so much of it and what it can do and what it can deliver. And I think that idea on idea thing is we're coming up with ideas all the time, what we can do with this stuff. So I'd agree the speed, but the speed of confusion is probably quite high as well, which I guess would slow down change. But also I think we're talking massive cultural change, aren't we really, which is a very different thing than the tech change. It's the tech culture, meaning that all the ways that we work and we live are changing because technology. That's quite hard because as humans we sort of, we talk about change a lot, but we don't quite like it when it happens to us, I think, quite so much.
And it's changing faster as well, I guess.
Too fast for my liking. I'm a bit of a Luddite. Like, I'm so analog with my little analog watch, and I kind of concur with Andy because I feel like I probably only use about 20% of the capabilities on my smartphone. And I always get very old models because I feel like that suits me. Like, I don't know about you, Ethan. I don't know, are you a bit of a whiz or?
I wouldn't say I'm a whiz, no.
Okay.
I think probably similar to your book, yeah. Just do the basics, make calls, send texts, that kind of thing.
That's all you need with your smartphone, really. But on the productivity puzzle, like Debo's point that is quite interesting because I also study economics. I'm not like a full-on like economist, but like we also need the technical definitions of productivity, and then I also had to do like the ACA exam. So like in terms of an accounting perspective, how we account for things, like I think these are sometimes almost too rigid to capture creativity because it's just such an amorphous thing. So I think Rory Sutherland is the vice chairman of Ogilvy at the moment, and he's just written a book, which is quite cool. It's on my to-read list, called Alchemy: The Surprising Power of Ideas That Don't Work or That Don't Make Sense. And his point was that, maybe the ad industry has suffered from the loss of long, boozy lunches, which eventually culminated in really cool ideas, but they weren't necessarily productive. So productivity may be perhaps too kind of constraining.
Well, they were long-term productive.
Oh yeah,
like what
exactly.
Came out
so
in
the
the end
timeline
was much better.
Exactly. Maybe
I don't think creativity is magic, but it's better for your creativity is better if you believe in magic. So I think
that's such a great tagline.
But the point really, it's a process, and it's a process of building ideas. You talk, you share, you get people. I mean, diversity is the best thing you can do for it. Is have lots of different opinions in a room, respect each other, and have a good process for talking about the work. And you'll have ideas, and they'll move forward. That's not magic. But the sense, what I think where it comes is the space you create for ideas and the belief, and when you get a sense. I've been in pitch rooms at sort of 2 a.m. with no idea in them. Literally, there's no idea in the room, and you've got trying to grasp, and you've got a pitch the next morning, and then someone has an idea, and it's the right idea, and the spark, and everyone's up, and you look around at the energy of the room, everyone's up, and everyone's feeling it, and that's the magic of it, the emotion of an idea, and that's what I really like is that spark of that narrative. I've got an idea, and you're up on your toes, and so. Of course, it's chemicals and it's a real fabric of stuff. It's not magic, but it feels like magic.
I'm even feeling the magic as you're describing it now.
There you go. But that's what humans are about with bags of chemicals. So.
Yeah, and it can be this whole business about ideas, Andy. I think it can be quite cyclical in that, as you were saying, our work environments are basically set up for us to think in a particular siloed way. And actually now the big idea is that we're going to break it up. But obviously the work environment is the consequence of a big idea from ages ago, which was we need business process. And it was magical back then. And I suppose it's always going to be so in that there will probably be sort of cyclical changes where we sort of overdo something that was very good. And then we think, oh no, we've got to recalibrate how we do this. And I think that's that's just part of the process. And with productivity growth and these other measures, they're always backward looking. So all of this change, these cyclical processes and other changes, they're happening. And as economists, actually, we tend to be, unfortunately, with a lot of things, very, very backward looking. So once the changes happen, we look back and say, oh, hang on, our measure just doesn't work because we don't capture these other things that have now come up. And so we keep on updating these measures. At the moment, there are a lot of ideas on how we can update the measure of productivity, and hopefully that will truly reflect some of this change. I'm an optimist, so I don't really think that actually productivity growth has been as bad as some of the numbers suggest.
I liked your point right at the start. You talked about you will also measure happiness, and I think an outcome of great creativity is happiness. You know, I think that because I would quite often talk about the emotive values. Again, because I will come from a place that's designed to create emotive connections. That's what communications is about, is to create connections with a customer or a human. And you use storytelling and visual form and dark arts. And,
but what about the great poets who are always miserable and therefore all like lovelorn or love lust?
Well,
and
but it's still emotion.
Like...
maybe not happiness, I suppose, but emotion.
Okay.
And that conveyance. And I think maybe because that point about an optimist, probably don't sell much product with lovelorn and unhappy poets, I suppose. But the point about an output of creativity is emotion, whether that's the energy that you can create with an idea, or whether that's happiness, or whether it's just storytelling, or word of mouth, or someone excited about something that they'll tell someone else. And I think you can measure creativity in that way, and it's cultural energy that it creates. And I think you watch. I'll always talk about when things like Halo and Uber first came along, and you watch people use them, and they would show their friends, oh, I'm going to call a cab. And you would say, well, what are you doing? And you say, oh, well, I've got it on my phone. I just press this button. And that person's like, what? What? You just press a button. And then suddenly the person with the phone is like, chest out and shoulders back, as if they've invented the thing. You know, and we all do that since we have a real pride about acquisition of early technology in culture. And it's fascinating. Like I just downloaded it. I didn't make it, but now I feel a sense of superiority and that's the magic of ideas again, and how they pass around is that there's especially technology ideas and these innovative ideas like this is that they create pride in ownership.
Mm-hmm. So I think one thing that's coming through for me, especially when talk about measuring creativity in terms of productivity or happiness, is especially the productivity point. It's that they're inherently linked, so we're almost using them synonymously, productivity and creativity. So I guess that comes to my first question of why do you think we need it? Is it this idea because it inherently makes us happy to be creative beings, or do you think is it about expanding our economy? What is the importance of creativity, I guess?
Big question.
We ask the big questions here.
But why? Because you start with why do we need it? And I think it's fundamental. Okay. To humans, you know, in the sense of make and invent and create and think and improve. Yeah. You know, there's sort of the human race, if you like, the race. If you take it as a literal sense of a chase we constantly invent. It's a constant journey. So I think. And then there's something apparently, and I'll get in trouble for this, but like we have an ability in our brains to hold two ideas at once. And the fact that we can hold two ideas at once means that we can smash them together and invent a third idea. And that is, I've read, so that someone can tell me if it's true or not, that's and that makes a lot of sense to me because most ideas are just connecting things and bringing two things together. That was me clapping my hands on the podcast then, by the way. So that sense that we have an innate ability to bring thoughts together to create new thought means that, you know, it's innate in us to be creative. And then just talk about that emotional value. It feels good to be creative. It feels good to invent stuff and have ideas of any kind, of any size. And I think that's innate in our value system to ourselves as well. And so for me, we need it because it's intrinsic to who we are. And actually, I think we de-school it, if that's the way of thinking. We school people out of it traditionally in school and in business. And I think maybe that's changing now, because if you look at things like the World Economic Forum, they talk about the skills needed for business. Creativity is at number 3. It should be at number 1 in my opinion. But you know, it's at number 3 by next year. You know, and so we're starting to see the value of creativity in business. which I think is really exciting, because that's it sort of suggests that there isn't creativity in business, which is nonsense. There's creative business everywhere. But if everybody in business felt that they could be creative in business, then the potential of that is extraordinary, I think.
Well, I can't quite talk creativity up like the chief creative officer. But I think that other than what actually any economist will tell you, that is, it develops improvements, it sort of delivers improvements in living standards, gives us good growth. I think what it's really done is actually changed the lives of lots of people around us, actually improved, I would say, access to what used to be seen as luxuries. So air travel was a luxury 50, 60 years ago. Now everyone flies. It's quite a big change. Actually, in India, where I come from, I've seen over the last maybe 20 to 30 years, things change, I mean, incredibly rapidly, and all of that is the consequence of technology. So this is a personal story. My maternal uncle went and settled in the US in the probably sort of late 60s, early 70s. And he used to come to India to see my mum and her family once every year and a half. And that was really the only time they could see him. And now I'm in touch with my parents almost every weekend over FaceTime. And it's a huge change for them. It's a huge change for lots of people.
It's totally magical and totally normal at the same time.
Yeah,
FaceTime's incredible. Like any of these things, it's you watch someone who's never seen it before use it for the first time, and they're just like, "Whoa! How much am I paying for this?" And you're like, "Nothing," and it's just incredible technology. But it's sort of that the access to ideas is really, for me, it's just access to this stuff, to other people's ideas, is what changed lives. And whether it's the internet or whether it's a consequence of the internet with video calling on the device that sits in your pocket, and all those kind of stuff, I just think is that to then equate that to well-being or happiness or productivity is great. The sense that that's making people happier, more fulfilled in their lives, which is why everything in that TV show Silicon Valley ends with "I make the world a better place." every pitch, irrespective, I make the world a better place.
So, given that it's about this idea of ideas, is there, this view, or can you posit this view that any role or any person or any organisation can be made more creative? So, like for economists, because I studied economics and also some management on the side, like people are often feeling like, oh, you're not quite as expressive or exciting as the English lit students who are prancing about the place always, but actually, if it's just about ideas, can anything be infused with a lot more creativity?
Well, I would say that creativity is often, I suppose, sort of mistook to be exotic. It need not be.
Or arcane is the way I quite often say.
Yeah, it need not be. A previous career, I was a researcher in Microsoft, and I used to work on cryptography and applied mathematics. And I have to say, some of the most creative people I've known in my life actually are mathematicians and scientists.
Ethan will love
from
this. Ethan is a mathematician.
from there. And it's often sort of, I think some of these stereotypes don't really help, where you think of sort of quite siloed people sitting in, sort of some room somewhere and trying to prove a theorem, and you think that they're mathematicians and therefore they really couldn't be creative. But actually there's a lot of creativity that goes on in those fields. I think it's what you think is creative. And I was thinking about sort of lots of different examples where actually it's the inventor who is celebrated for many things. So, simple example, take the printing press. So we all think that the Gutenberg printing press, it's a widely accepted thing, was one of the biggest inventions of humanity. And it brought us lots of different things. Gave us the Reformation, gave us sort of mass adoption of science, also ideas sort of led to the birth of the novel, led to the birth of newspapers, everything. Modern media is a consequence of the Gutenberg printing press. But when you think of the printing press, actually, no one celebrates what is actually otherwise quite a humble invention, without which none of this would have been possible. That is the invention of paper. So when the printing press was invented, you could have used parchment to print stuff on, and parchment is a sort of animal skin-based material on which they would print stuff. Gutenberg printed a few Bibles on parchment, but it was too expensive. You needed about 250 sheep for one book. And paper really saved the day. And in fact, all these ideas that we're talking about, all these ideas were initially disseminated across the world because of paper. But no one thinks of paper as all people have thought about.
Written language, movable type, prose, all that kind of stuff.
And I think there's this thing where what seems sort of visibly creative or seems to fit the stereotype of creative is seen as creativity, whereas I think creativity lurks probably sort of everywhere all around us.
The definition is too narrow, I think.
Yeah.
And so we define it into the creative industries. But I would agree with you that I've seen plenty of creativity in economics and science and all areas. And so I think, can it be taught? I believe it can. I totally agree that the definition is too narrow and that most jobs in some form are creative. I do think some people are naturally more creative than others, just like some people are better at maths than others or better at sports than others. And so I think there must be some kind of genetic structure or something that makes you prone to it. But then there's a lot of just ideology or behavioral stuff that makes you better ideas. Maybe you're less risk averse, or the way you think about the world is or the way you grew up has made you better at receiving and dealing with ideas. But then there's press-ups, of just getting fit and getting good at it. And
I think the literal press-ups.
Well, no, but metaphorically. But I say that a lot. Like I was a designer. I was a very much a visual type of creative, and now I'm a writer. And that's just because over the years I've done so much writing, and I don't actually a proper writer I think is amazing. Like I can write. And there's a difference between like when I see someone who's amazing
as in copywriting.
Yeah, sort of writing and
copywriting
or what have you. Yeah, but that's something I have learned and get better at all the time, and I practice. And I can remember when I first started out and I watched people designing, I was like, how do you do that? And then I could over time do it. And then the same with idea generation and the process of having ideas commercially for communications. Again, you learn that. And so I think you can be taught it, and I think you can improve at it. But I do think you need to work at it. It's a skill and an art form, just like any other. But it's not what was the word? Exotic or arcane. It's desirable and it's attractive and it's fun and it's innate. But so I would encourage everyone to work at it and believe they can do it.
Yeah. And I guess we've done a podcast recently around automation and the robots coming and what are the valuable human skills that we really need to cultivate. And I guess the theory is that creativity is rising in importance, which perhaps both of you might disagree that in fact it's always been of pinnacle importance. But the idea now is that is one of the key things we should be teaching in schools and things. So I guess how could we encourage this in future generations? So you say like it can be taught. So how do you think this can be encouraged, especially in the age of automation?
I think the encouraging critique and collaboration and diversity and confidence, all quite sort of strong but base human values that will create ideas. The fact that you feel confident to share, the fact that the people that you're sharing with think differently to you, the fact that you are able to articulate why you don't agree with an idea or why you do agree with an idea so it can improve. I think they're all sort of good cognitive human skills about interrelationships and storytelling and communication. And that's where good ideas come from. And then just the basic ability to say, well, why is it done that way? A bit of, why don't we do it this way? Just a bit of like dissatisfaction with the way the world is working helps too, and say, well, we could do this better, which lots of people share. And I think that the time for creativity everywhere is coming. I think it has been in pockets, and it's been incredible. You look at the fashion industry, the film industry, the advertising industry. There's pockets, and our UK creative industries. Debo will probably have a better figure on it than me, but it's vast and it's world respected. But for me, the canvas, because of automation for creativity into all business, is incredible, and the fact that it can release all of us to be more creative and have more ideas is really exciting. And my hope in it is it all just gets a bit weirder. because if robots are going to do everything else, then we're going to be able to come up with some pretty weird stuff on top of that. Because we've got to stay ahead of these robots as well, because they'll be able to have ideas too. So we just got to get weirder and weirder, which sounds quite fun to me. Yeah. So my hope is that human expression and human creativity is just released, and the mantra I have on it is that I'm not waiting for technology to replace me, I'm waiting for it to release me. And I think for many in the workplace that's what's going to happen, and I think that's really exciting.
I can definitely tell you write coffee, because that's so
the snap lines.
Yeah, exactly. You come up with these perfect,
giving us so many sound bites.
Taglines. Debo, what are your top tips for being more creative?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'd say that this idea that creativity is becoming more and more important, I don't believe in. I think creativity was always very important. I think perhaps, for lack of a better word, there's more hype around creativity, and I don't think it's a bad thing, to be honest. I think it's good that more people are aware of the fact that actually it's their creative ideas, however small they may be, completely change the world or contribute to that. In terms of learning creativity, I think that's quite a complex question. I think the classical way of, I suppose, breaking down learning creativity would be to learn how to critique things and to learn how to make new things. And so essentially you create new ideas by critiquing old ones, challenging them, and then coming up with new ideas. And I think that still holds true. And you could do that by doing a variety of things. I mean, you study that at a very basic level. Whenever you study history, you're challenging old interpretations of history. You study philosophy, you do the same thing. You study maths, you're doing the same thing. You're actually challenging old ways of looking at things or science. In a way, I feel that actually our education has always focused on making us creative in spirit, but the way we are tested and the way education has become more and more a signaling tool has made us forget the creative spirit of education. And I think regaining that would probably be very helpful.
It's a really great thought. The idea that education is a platform for creativity, but we are throttling it by the way we measure it.
Yeah.
Where we measure the success of education takes away the creative, because it's too structured or it's too by rotes. And actually what you need to fix is the measurement methodology. You've sold it like an economist. You want to fix the measurement of it, but the spirit of education being creative, I think, is a really interesting thought.
I was actually going to ask you a question about this, Ethan, given that you have been a teacher, you have been in schools. What are your thoughts on how schools go about creativity?
So I think there's two things with being a teacher. So in one, I really like how you linked creativity and critical thinking, and I think that's not just restricted to one subject. So I think in maths you can definitely encourage critical thinking as you can in English and history, and I think that does produce creativity, definitely. I think the challenge for being a maths teacher is stifling someone's creativity where that might not be the area that they're creative in. So it's the pushing the importance of that and piling more hours of teaching on students where perhaps that isn't where they need to be, where in fact they need to be encouraged to do art or dance or whatever it is, where they find their freedom of expression. So I think that's the challenge as a teacher in the current system. But yeah, no, I think freedom to fail as well, that's another really important one.
So I have a question around creativity and business specifically in this moment in time, really, which I think is for you, Debo, really. But it seems to me that this is the moment for creativity more widely for many reasons: critical thinking, robotics, sort of cultural change in business, and what have you. What will it take for all businesses to become creative businesses? What do we need to unlock in the way that we work and to release this potential that I think is in all business?
That's a huge question, Andy. I'd say that businesses in general, I mean, their whole, I suppose, raison d'etre is that they need to be creative, and they're there to actually come up with new ideas and new products and new things for people to use. But obviously, with the economic cycle, creativity sort of waxes and wanes a bit. And if you look at, I suppose, the way British businesses or Western businesses have responded after the financial crisis, I'd say they've been a bit risk averse, and they could be perhaps more willing to take risk. That would make them look more creative. They've been a bit risk averse in the sense that there's been a squeeze on investment. People businesses have hoarded labour, and perhaps sort of opening up to more technological investment could be a new way of actually unleashing creativity, forcing people to actually think about new ways of doing things. Now that's the sort of hard economic analysis of this. But also, if you look at what different businesses seem to have done over the last, 100, 200 years of existence, you see that actually it doesn't take a lot for a business to be creative. You have small ideas that can completely change how businesses work. So if we look at IKEA, which is, I suppose, sort of everyone around us has IKEA furniture, and IKEA existed for quite a while as a furniture catalogue. Before they came up with the idea of actually flat packing. So they were actually pushing lots of furniture into the back of a van so that they could carry it to a photo shoot for a catalogue. And they suddenly realized that they couldn't pack all of the furniture in the van, and they came up with the idea of actually disassembling some of their furniture, and that was the big idea. This is from the 50s. It didn't need to have been then. They could have come up with the idea at any other point in time. So there are these small things which completely change, I think, the way a business is conducted. And I don't think there's a good time or a bad time for that.
So I guess for one last question, it would be, we were asked to think, what would our listeners want to take away from this podcast? So I think I kind of had two thoughts, and one would be, what one tip would you give to be more creative in either your day-to-day work or anything that you enjoy? And what would be your one tip to enable others to be more creative in what they do?
Rather than helpfully, I want to sort of fix you with a steely eye for the first one and just say, be more creative. It's like what's my tip? Just do it. Like, it's innate. And so which isn't that helpful, but I think it comes from within, and the desire to change and to question, so I think it begins there. It begins with every individual to say, well, actually, people, I always say this, people put that, you can't see this podcast, people put their hands up like there's a gun pointing at them, and they say, I'm not very creative, and it's like submission. You're like, well, where's the threat? This is innate in you. So I think really the tip is, it comes from you and it comes within, and just start. And just start expressing yourself and expressing your ideas and your thoughts, and then I guess the other is to create a culture around that creates that as sort of like we have actually here. It's not just permissible, it's desirable. We're a business that's seeking to invent the future with our clients, and to do that we need to be creative, and we need all of our people to be creative to do that. And so it's not just it's nice that our people are creative, it's absolutely imperative that we are a creative business. So I think the first one is just get on and do it, take a deep breath. It's all good. And the second is to create around you, if you're in a position to be so, or select places around you that create cultures for creativity to flourish, because that's what I said, you need other people. The future's hard, you need friends, which is the soundbite.
So on point.
I agree with Andy, actually. I don't think one can be more or less creative. I think people are just creative in their own unique ways. I'd just say people can probably be, probably sort of expose their creative side a bit more by being less satisfied.
Okay.
If they're unsatisfied with things, this is going to be a downfall. We're going to say economists are measuring happiness, and everyone's very, very happy, and I'm telling people that they ought to be less satisfied. Right? There you go. Okay. If you really want to be very creative, I think probably expose your creative side by being less satisfied, which will make you challenge things.
I think there's two really solid points in that. Definitely be less satisfied, like just change how things work. But you also said in your individual way, and I think that's really important, is don't try and be creative like someone else. Be creative like you. Bring yourself to that conversation. And then if everybody does that, then you get that collision and that diversity and that collaboration. And so be creative in your way and celebrate that. and have confidence in that. And then I really like be dissatisfied. Yeah, that works.
So be unsatisfied in your own way, and then hopefully
There it
everything
is.
will get.
There's a strap line.
Yeah.
And then you do you,
Yeah.
basically.
And hopefully everything will get
I
weird.
like being unsatisfied in your own way.
Oh, perfect.
Excellent. So I think we should wrap it up with answering the question of the week, which is, can creativity change the world?
Andy.
Yes, it can. My sense was it's a silly question because it already has a million times, and I think it can. Can it continue to do so? Yes, it can, and will do so, irrespective of what I say or think. Someone else will come up with an idea that will change the world, and someone else will do it again and again and again and again, and that's exciting and interesting and worth protecting our world for.
Yeah, I'd agree with Andy. It always has, and I don't see any reason why it won't. I mean, I wouldn't be an economist if I didn't extrapolate from the past.
I think that's our simplest answer to date. Yes, it can change the world. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. That's a really interesting and exciting conversation. So thanks for coming in.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. Next time, tune in as we ask our next big question. This podcast is produced by our very own Pod Squad and hosted by George Parrott, Lizzie Elston, Ethan Worth and Dara Latinwo. Thanks to our creative studio for their technical support. Original music by Ali Barrett from our consulting team.